Welcome to MOTS, where we'll be applying the Manzer or Mosley Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or MOTS! This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of MOTS. In keeping with the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, we have the new release, Star Trek Beyond, which we will be talking about in depth. I am here with Scott Thurlow.
Hello.
Ian Manzer.
Live long or prosper.
And Beth Morgan.
Hello.
It goes without saying that this is going to be a very personal thing for me, and I'm going to try to keep all my comments to a bare minimum. But suffice it to say, on Facebook, this week I have been running down the previous 12 movies, if for no other reason than to show people that just because I've been a Trekkie for 43 years does not mean I'm blindly biased. I tore up about 4 films, and the middle films, and anytime a film has a flaw, I will definitely, talk about it. So I just want to go that while I am biased, I'm not blind.
All right.
So, Scott, would you like to give your humorous logline?
Yes, for this movie I came up with Guardians of the Federation.
Fair enough.
Or Starfleet, however you want to call it. That should be the subtitle. Star Trek Guardians of
the Federation.
Yes.
Federation's where you want to go.
Sure. Well, that's what I came up with.
And Ian.
All right, I'm going to give the actual synopsis of this. Basically, the Enterprise has been out in deep space for 3 years.
3 years,
of
I believe
their
they said.
however many year-long mission. And they get wrapped up in a sense, deep space politics, and a group of aliens who are trying to create or reassemble a super weapon, and it goes through they kind of get trapped on this alien planet and are attempting to rebuild their team and find a way to beat a alien species that is overpowering them, both physically, manpower, and also because of plot devices technologically.
Yes.
So that's basically
it's kind of simple,
broad brush of the movie.
Okay. Very good. And in keeping with that, Scott, would you like to let us all know of the introduction?
So we agreed that it sort of cuts off. So as you said, we sort of get some exposition from Kirk. He's doing his captain's logging, saying, they've been out exploring, blah, 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 for X years, and now they're going to return to, I think, resupply at Yorktown. Was it called?
Yeah.
A newly built large space station, and stop over there. Yeah, go ahead.
The Yorktown's a Dyson sphere, right?
Kind
or
of.
something like that.
It's not.
Not quite, but...
No.
No.
It's a sphere, but a Dyson sphere has to be around a star.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah.
Technically, it's not. It's like the crucifix thing from Uncharted. It's technically not a crucifix. But anyways.
It was a very clever kind of design that they had for it.
Yeah, it's basically, I was going to call it more like a Halo from Halo. Like
that's very true.
A Guardian world, if you
Or
will.
a spherical citadel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, so they stop, the crew stops there, and while they're there, a ship materializes, that they pick up, Yorktown picks it up on their radar, whatever Starfleet has there. And they get like a garbled message, and it seems as if a lone survivor is asking for help. So they try to, they quickly figure out her language, the alien language that she speaks, and agree to go follow her lead wherever the coordinates are through a unexplored nebula to a planet where she claims her crew has been stranded. So I think that's about where, once they accept that mission, I believe they head off. That's about where the intro ends. We agree. And
Yes.
it was all fine set up. Actually, there was one little funny line. Yes, it's a dialogue, but when Kirk was going through his captain's log, he said something like, "My days have begun to feel episodic." That was a really funny line. So it was perfectly fine setup. You reintroduced to the characters that they've established from the Star Trek universe.
See, actually, when you brought up that point about reintroducing the characters, it did feel kind of forced. Catching people up on where people's relationships are now.
I guess I see what you mean, but I didn't have a bigger problem with it.
I think a great example is like the Uhura-Spock relationship. That kind of felt shoveled into the introduction. But
I see what you mean, but it wasn't egregious to me. So again, it was perfectly fine, basically generic-ish Star Trek setup, but it was all handled well. And they laid out what adventure was going to happen, or at least what their ostensible mission was, and then they go out and do it. And of course, it goes wrong and awry, and we'll talk about that. But I'm going to give it a 1. I think it was perfectly fine.
I was not sold on it initially. So, I don't know. I think you didn't mention the fact that they do the diplomatic mission at the beginning where they introduce the MacGuffin
quickly.
for the film.
Sure.
Yeah, that's true.
And that felt... I understand what their attempts were, and it kind of to set the mood for this film as it was slightly different.
Sure.
But it was, to me, kind of silly. And I don't know, again, with the heavy kind of expositional factor of the introduction, I can't wholeheartedly give it a 1. I have to give it a 0 off the bat.
Beth?
I didn't mind the silliness because Star Trek has always had that element of a little bit silly sometimes, so I was okay with that. I actually really liked the exposition and Kirk's logging and how he described being sort of, I guess lost is the theme they were going for in space, and at odds as to what he wanted with his life and with his crew and with his career. So I'll give it a 1 because I was along for that ride.
Fair enough.
I'm trying to keep this focused on this movie, and as opposed to talking about the character arc that Kirk has had over the last 2 films. But I do like the humanizing of it because here he is. He's out there. He's, as he said to McCoy while they're having a drink, that, he joined Starfleet on a dare. He was cocky, and here he is. And I remember once one of the astronauts that went to the moon, I believe it may have been Neil Armstrong, said the one thing that science fiction, except certain science fiction, ever gets right is space is boring. You're sitting there a lot, and you're in this voidless vacuum. And here we are in the 23rd century. You've got a giant starship with most of the amenities, and I really like the fact that it's hard to gain this line he says about gaining your footing even when the gravity is artificial. And I thought it really kind of spoke to that, because as far as character introduction, reintroduction, I thought it was superb. I thought they did everything really, really well. But between that and his conversation with Commodore Paris about the vastness of space, how lonely it could be, that it's such a big thing. I thought it handled all that really well. I'm definitely giving it a 1.
Here's my issue with it, though. I really liked Bones McCoy for the first 2 films of this iteration of Star Trek. And I felt at this time they were verging on, as in Galaxy Quest, with the parody of attempting, like, yeah, I get it, McCoy, you're kind of a snarky person.
I know.
I get it. Oh, Spock, I understand you're a Vulcan. I felt that it was almost at times verging on parody, especially, maybe not later on in the film, but at the beginning. It's like, here are the 5 standard things that Spock has to say. Here's the 5 standard things that Kirk has to say. Here's what McCoy has to say.
I get it. That's more like dialogue, but I see what you're saying.
Let's throw him, but it's characterization too, and it's the introduction, and they really hammered it right at the beginning.
See, I disagree because right from the word jump, I felt that these characters had arrived. I felt they were a perfect blending of the original series and the maturity after. I mean, I felt like in Star Trek 2009, it's just like they were very much winking at the audience. I felt that in Into Darkness, they were really coming into their own. And I feel like in this film that they have finally arrived.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to add, like I said what I said, and I think it was perfectly fine. A solid 1 for me, at least.
So,
and Ian, would you like to talk about the body?
Okay, so they go into this nebula on a rescue mission, only to find out it's a trap.
I was waiting for someone to say the Star Wars thing. It's a trap. Guess what?
Yeah, there is literally a bee-like swarm. I think they actually reference that it's modeled on, and that totally destroys the Enterprise. And half the crew, I suppose, dies in this destruction, or
a lot of red
the
shirts.
Other half, a lot of red shirts end up going the way of red shirts, and then everyone else who's like most of the other people who escape end up just getting rounded up. A few, all the key players end up making it to the planet safe and sound. Kirk and Chekhov, yes, are on their own. You have Spock, who's wounded with, luckily with Bones McCoy, the doctor.
And Scotty's just wandering around.
Who meets an alien who has been trapped on the planet for a very long time as well. And she's kind of not a resistance fighter, but she has living outside of the
She's living
totalitarian
her
control
hermit kind of life, if you will.
Yeah. And basically, as I mentioned earlier in the synopsis, the bad guy Kroll, I believe his name was Kroll,
whatever,
is attempting to reconstruct this kind of plague or some kind of like nanomachine
bioweapon. I think they said it was.
Yeah,
some Star Trek
device.
techno-babble shit.
It's a MacGuffin.
Sure.
It's the
So they have their adventures. They all end up forming up to Sulu and Ahura are trapped on the base with the other, and so you're kind of following these parallel paths as everyone tries to reunite to fight back against what was it, Kroll and his forces, and they end up like basically finding a old Franklin class ship or of a Starfleet that was there for a very long time, and get it working, and then basically it ends up with Kroll attempting to destroy Yorktown, and Kirk and company attempting to beat him to save the day, and that's where I think the conclusion starts. Yes. So I started to enjoy it. I really liked the kind of I always like it's in science fiction the idea of being lost in the wilderness. To move off of science fiction for a second, like things like Heart of Darkness, where you're like exploration into the unknown and having to face against not only the forces of nature but cultures you don't understand, always attracts me. And I think they did it well here, and they had moments of excitement. And I think everything, if not worked perfectly, at least worked.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I would say. Like I wasn't super enthralled by it, I suppose, but nor was I bored, I guess, at any point. It was like perfectly serviceable and fine. And it was an interesting story. And you're right, it was kind of a neat setup to have like little pockets of survivors who are trying to like get in contact with whoever else may have survived and try to find each other. And it made for a good plot because of the fact that you can focus on you get like 10 minutes of McCoy and Spock doing whatever, and then you get Kirk and Chekhov doing their little what they're going to do.
What I also like is they paired people together that you normally wouldn't see in a Star Trek film to see how. And
that was a pretty smart idea. So it all held together pretty well for me.
What I loved about it, and this goes back to why I love Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 4, the original crew, so much, is because they focused in those movies. They really focused on the entire crew, not just McCoy, Kirk, and Spock. In the first two films, while the other crew was would definitely have the role to play and definitely had a part to play. It really was, ironically enough, about Spock's emotional journey and Kirk's personal journey. And this time, I loved it because they did split the crew apart. You got to see different aspects of their personality that you haven't seen in the other two films. Mm-hmm. And as you said, you mix up people like, I have never seen in any iteration of Star Trek Kirk and Chekhov being by themselves, and I agree with you. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, solid one for me at least.
Yeah, I'll give it a solid one.
Solid one.
One as well.
Do you have anything to add?
For the introduction?
No, for the body. Is there anything you want to add to the body?
I don't think so.
Okay, Beth, would you like to bring us to the conclusion?
Sure. So the conclusion, I think we were starting when the Franklin takes off from the planet, which they have to make it reach a certain speed before it will even take off. And it's perched on top of, I guess, a mountain. So it's kind of a cool scene where they have to do like a free fall until it reaches what they're calling terminal velocity, and then it can power the engines enough to take off. So it was a cool little
for whatever
roller
reason,
coaster.
They had to do that. But I rolled with it. But it was a cool scene, yes.
So then they managed to take off, of course, because the movie would end there if it didn't. So they join the battle that has already... Krall's swarm has already left to attack the Yorktown, and the Franklin is kind of behind. They have to fight this swarm, and they're outgunned, they're outnumbered. There's not really many other ships in the sky, in space to fight. So they have to come up with a plan to make the odds a little more in their favor. So they come up with a plan, and I liked this because they came up with it. It wasn't Kirk's plan. It wasn't anyone specific's plan. They were literally figuring out together, finishing each one's sentences. Yeah. And this whole theme of unity that was going through, like it was like a team effort. So I like that. So Spock and McCoy are in an alien ship trying to get in the middle of them so they can disrupt basically their communication so they can't work as a swarm.
Yeah.
So they have like a giant kind of disruptor weapon, which winds up being the Beastie Boys
Sabotage,
song.
of course.
Which
Great classical music.
was so awesome and so well choreographed. And then Yorktown's defenses join the battle, and then it becomes a battle in the space station, not just in space. And basically the Enterprise crew saves the day.
Of course. But I was going to say, the reason I said my log line is because that whole scene, that entire part, reminded me of the thing from Guardians when it was when Nova or whatever was under assault. It even looked like it too. But it was still fine. Like, it was an exciting and like you said, well choreographed action scene. So
See, the thing is,
I have no problems with it.
I kind of knew that song was coming from the trailer.
Uh-huh.
I started cringing a little bit when it was just about to happen. But then I kind of like eased up as I was watching it. It was a fun scene. My issue actually is the fight within the, like, basically Kirk battling
the Prawl.
Crawl in the ventilation tubes of the Yorktown.
But Kirk has to have a battle.
Yeah.
He basically just has to.
It reminded me, like, the first time he fought Crawl early on in the movie, it reminded me of the famous thing where Kirk fights the lizard man in the rubber suit.
Yeah.
And it kind of, like, it felt cheesy Star Trek, but not in a necessarily bad way. In like a kind of classical way there. So, I don't know. That was by only one rub with the ending, but in general, I enjoyed it.
But what I liked about that is that when they leave that little ventilation tube and you can see the glass, the shattered glass, just like kind of following, like,
The
it looks like a wave. Like, they
Yeah.
call it a slipstream of gravity, but it looks like a wind
Yeah.
sort of circle, and you can kind of guess that he's going to join in because you can see where it's going, so we can guess where to jump in. I thought that was actually really cool. I liked the weird gravity because they didn't know where they were going to. They would fall one direction and then kind of quick switch direction.
Yeah.
So I liked that aspect of it. I liked the physics of it. I thought it was entertaining.
I've never seen a low gravity, semi-zero gravity fight in Star Trek.
Well,
But they didn't make it unbelievable because they weren't
No.
just like floating. They were fighting when they were against a wall or something. So it
Yeah,
wasn't
and I like the
That's
way
fine.
they said that the gravity is going to get increasingly less as it would. And I do like when I first saw the trailer back in December and it was action scenes played to the Beastie Boys song, I was like, oh my God. And then, after I got a reprimand from Beth, I held my breath until I could see more of it. And when he's just like, you did see the Beastie Boys song coming, and even I was going to cringe for a second there, but as soon as it started, I'm like, it brings us back to 2009. And when McCoy goes, is this classical music? And Spock goes, I believe so. It reminded me so much of Star Trek 4, when in Star Trek 4, they were talking about profanity, and Kirk goes to Spock, you're going to see in a lot of literature at the time, novels by Jackie Collins and Harold Robbins, and Spock goes, the Giants. I mean, I thought it was just such a great little callback. And then I'm going to reiterate what you guys said, that scene, because to me, in a lot of movies, to make CGI work, it's CGI. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it's like, okay, we understand it's CGI, get on with it. The choreography was so beautifully done. And I do have to get props to the final conclusion when they are reunited at Kirk's birthday.
Belated birthday celebration.
Yes. Kirk walking in going, absent friends, which is, from something from
And Chekhov was right there.
Star Trek 3. And first of all, it holds more relevancy now that Anton Yelchin died, but also in universe, you've lost the Enterprise, a lot of your crew, and Ambassador Spock. And in the end, the last shot, you see the crew gather together, and then they do a time lapse thing watching the Enterprise A get built. As each one of them says a line from it, I thought it was I thought the ending was really sharp from beginning to end.
It was perfectly fine for me. And the action was well done and exciting and enjoyable. I have no problems with it other than that.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a soft one in general.
I'm going to give it a solid one.
I'm a solid one.
I'm a solid one.
All right, one's all around.
And to me, it's the themes. Wow, there are so many themes I could talk about, but I'm going to talk about. Yeah, actually,
Okay.
I'm going to
You say
talk.
so.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about the theme of unity, because at the beginning of the movie, Kirk is feeling isolated. He's talking about just being out in the void, and he's talking about the sacrifices everybody makes. And there's a picture of Sulu's daughter on the control panel, and his birthday's coming up, and he's coming to the realization that he's now a year older than his dad would have been, and his dad really held true to the ideals of the Federation and Starfleet, and he kind of went in this half-cocked. The film then goes into about loss, because there is a point in time where Kirk realizes the magnitude of what he's lost, that he's lost his ship, that his crew's dying, that there's nothing he can do about it. And together, he's working with Chekhov, but Scotty starts to be the glue that puts it together. And then working with Scotty and Jayla and Chekhov and getting the family back together really brings home to Kirk, this sense of unity. And that Krall, for his motivations, is thinking that that strength is gathered through, we'll get into this more when we talk about the antagonist, is achieved more through conflict than it is with unity. And when we get to the end, you see the unity.
Yes, but Krall, I completely agree with that's what they're going for, except for the fact that Krall basically exists. His soldiers are a hive mind, in a way, especially at the end. He is the perfection of unity, not divisiveness. Like all of the rhetoric he's going throughout the entire thing flies in the face of what his tactics are,
Yes.
what his methodology are.
I was waiting to say that too, which is funny. But
What his culture is. And in a sense, if anything, it's about the independence of the Starfleet and the fact that they can function on their own. Where the fact that Krall's world is so unified
that a single Beastie Boys song destroys his entire fleet.
Exactly.
But anyway.
So the Beastie Boys can take him down. So the fact that every action in the movie speaks against the vocal message that they're giving is what really made me twitch a little bit.
I don't think so. Well, I see it differently, because his unity is one man's will, and he's a human. He started out as a human, so he's not even like a different culture. He's not a different
They
mind.
reveal that later on, yes.
He's not interested in the unity of him and his forces. He just wants them to be his extension. So he's not interested in unifying like various individuals. He's just one man's will imposed upon an army, essentially. Whereas this Federation is a unity of individuals. They're like individuals that have unified and come together. So I don't see that there's any kind of problem there.
Allow me to say that I'm surprised you had anything at all to speak about these, because to me it wasn't much there. Like, yes, I agree that those can be elements of it, but to me it's just sort of like a lighter action movie with not much to say about it.
It's kind of hard for me to make the point and to elaborate on the point without getting into the antagonist, because I think I know. I think you've made mention and know where it's going. But I think that given the antagonist's journey that we don't see, that we are caught up on, that his perspective's a bit distorted.
Sure. No one's arguing that, I would say. But I don't know. I just didn't think there was enough originally. You guys may have just convinced me now that there was more substance to it. But walking out of the theater, I was thinking to myself, there just wasn't much message-wise there.
May I interject another theme?
Sure.
You also have an interesting, I think this is the more interesting theme that they just briefly touch upon in here, which is the idea of having to live up to not only, like in Kirk's case, it's his father, and that he's growing to the age where his father died. Mm-hmm. So now he's kind of achieving his own identity. But you also have Spock, who has to live up to the identity of Spock Prime.
Yes.
And him thinking, I have to leave because I have to follow in the footsteps of what came before. So in a way, this is a meta-narrative of Star Trek itself saying...
kind of.
Let's create our own identity there. I think it's an interesting thing. I don't think they explore it as fully as they could have.
That's what I'm going to say, yeah.
But it's something I saw.
Like, yes, it's there, but they didn't really do much with it. But I don't know. I see what you're saying, though.
I mean, that's That's really great. I didn't think of it in terms of like the meta, even though I alluded to it, not even thinking about it, I didn't really consciously think of the meta narrative to it, which is really awesome. I thought, but I thought I thought that was kind of more like the subtextual through line.
Sure, I guess.
Can I add something else?
Sure.
Well, I also thought it was interesting because when you first meet Krull, he seems very alien. He seems like he comes from a world that shouldn't know anything about, and you're supposed to think he's alien. Then you discover that the Federation and so humans have figured out a way to kind of get past their differences, and you see him as like this other, and so there is someone outside of this Federation who becomes the other, but then you find out that once again, just like in Into Darkness, like their big enemy is themselves.
A former
it's a human
member of them, yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And getting back to one thing that Beth did point out on our way home with regard to loss was that when the escape pods are jettisoned, Beth pointed out that they do a front angle. You could see the cameras pointed at each character as they leave, but when it comes to Kirk's time, you're seeing from over his shoulder. You're only seeing his reflection, and you're seeing the saucer section itself go down, which I really have to say I didn't think about it at the time, but it really just says a lot in terms of, the impact of loss.
Sure, if you say so. But I think I'm going to maybe give themes a soft 0 at the end of the day, perhaps.
I agree with you, Scott.
I'm going with 1.
I'm going with 1.
All right, so 2 zeros and 2 1s.
Okay, and Scott, we move on to the antagonist.
Yeah, so since we just talked a bit about him, Krull, here's the thing for me. I did not particularly feel he was threatening or even, like, what his plan was. Like, I understood what the movie was saying to me, but I thought he was kind of a flat villain for most of it. Mm-hmm. And the reveal, I'm still debating with myself whether that's a cheap trick or, like, kind of a good one, narratively. Like, of him being a former Starfleet captain who was, like, lost in the early days of the Federation.
I have worse thing. Did it matter at all?
Well, that's what I'm trying to, like, sort of get at.
Yeah. I don't think
maybe it's more impactful. I mean, certainly it is, rather than him just being just a random alien, I suppose. But, like, I don't know if that's, like, clever enough for me, or trying to be too clever and then falling on its face. I just didn't, like, buy into him as much throughout. And maybe I was sort of turned a little bit more at the end when they figured out, like, he was the captain of the Franklin, etc. Like, that's fine, I guess, at the end of the day. But it's sort of, like, neither amazing nor terrible, I suppose. It's just like, oh, yeah, that's nice, I guess. So I don't know, like... He reminds me of, like, I forget what we were talking about in a recent-ish Bon Mots episode as well. But, like, he was sort of like a poor man's Apocalypse, I guess I want to say. Kind of. Like, that seemed to be... Like, his master plan, at least, was sort of that to begin with. It seemed, I'm going to unleash the biological weapon and get back at the Federation because they abandoned me. Alright. Like, that's sort of like a standard villainless motivation.
You didn't go where I was going to go, so I'm going to go... I see him as they stumbled upon Kurtz. Alright. I mean, because if you look at it... Right, he crashed, and he was kind of resentful that he was like a soldier who was lost from the war. He fought the Xindi, he fought the Romulans, and they're like, hey, you're no longer a soldier, you're going to be a Starfleet captain, your mission's peace. He gets lost, he feels abandoned, and then if you like look at him, he's got all these followers. He's just, I guess, his mind has been warped for so long that regardless, it may have just been like, I'm coming after you at the end. But after like 100 years of this and him building his own little society and the way people talk to him, I mean, he is a cult of personality the way everybody, he may have his minions that may have been like of a hive mind, but there are a lot of aliens that crash landed that he brought in that actually succumb to willingly working for him. And I thought he was really effective. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is the first time I think I ever thought that we might lose a member of this cast. I really, I thought he was Kurtz.
You said you believe the stakes, I guess. And now that you brought him Heart of Darkness, you might have just automatically convinced Ian that he's going to like it.
I'm mulling it over in my brain now. Because I brought up Heart of Darkness earlier, and I did not get that out of it initially, but you could be right.
Krull's methods had become unsound, if you will. So,
yes.
I mean, he went off. Go on.
And he was a soldier that was abandoned in peacetime. Like he kind of lost who he was.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. You might have just got me over the edge with that as well. That's well done, Chris.
If anything, you paralyzed me while I have to think about this more.
I was watching you. That was pretty fun.
Now he's becoming Kurtz himself.
So, because you could be right, I automatically... It's one of my favorite short stories of all time, and Apocalypse Now is a fantastic movie as well. I might have to give it a 1, just on the off chance you're correct.
Yeah, even if the movie itself didn't intend that, I think you convinced me that you can read enough of that into it that I think I may switch to a 1, yes.
When you brought up Heart of Darkness before, I'm like, oh, Scott's got to bring up Kurtz, and nobody mentioned it. I'm like, all right.
I didn't put it together at all, so well done, like I said.
Thank you.
Good connection there.
I'm obviously giving it a 1.
1.
A surprise. I was definitely going to give this a 0 before.
Let it be clear, only because you have made that point.
Yes.
Go on.
I know everybody's Achilles heel. Ian, protagonist. Or protagonists.
Well, it is, in a sense, an ensemble piece.
By its very nature, it's like always going to be.
But more so, like, from what Star Treks I've seen, and I'm mostly familiar with the J.J. Abrams run, but I have piecemeal. It's generally the captain and everyone else is supporting players, but this new iteration has focused more heavily on developing all the secondary characters. So I would definitely say that, like, Kirk, obviously, and Spock maybe
Chekhov.
not.
No,
because
I think
Spock
anybody
kind
who
of
got separated, like, on the planet, that is,
but I think
counts.
that the second movie was, in a sense, Spock's movie. In a sense.
Sure, but
here they developed his character, but he wasn't a focal point. I felt that McCoy was a focal point of the story. Scotty was to a certain extent as well. And like then Chekhov and Spock were on that second level of it. And with Uhura, because I mean she had parts to it. Perhaps I guess Sulu as well were kind of on that second tier of protagonists. So I will define mine as Scotty, McCoy, and Kirk were the protagonists.
The main three. Yeah.
And that's the thing is they've developed these characters already. This was a story that was, oddly enough, sort of unimportant for their character development, aside from them finally kind of becoming who they were all meant to be. But it's almost like we've established these characters. Here's a fun adventure with these characters.
Yeah, that's basically how I took it. And I sort of, because, like I said, because of how we said earlier that they were separated. So you got like little basic, like 10-minute little chunks of each the little groups doing whatever they're doing. Like that was fine. So I count all of those as equal. Like I see what you're saying about the lesser, like tiers, if you will. Yeah. But the core crew, if you will, like the bridge crew, essentially, was all fine. And yes, you're right. Like it's weird because they've been so established previously that they don't really need to like have that much development at this point. But I think they had enough, and I think all the actors did a good job, like playing the characters that are known and loved by the fanboys, if you will.
Here's the thing: is when Spock is trying to discover if he wants to leave the crew and become the ambassador, he pulls out a picture of the original cast, and looks at them, and I think it's kind of again the meta narrative thing. Yeah, and that's the entire their growth as characters is strictly meta narrative.
Okay, fair enough. And given that, though, like I agree with it largely, and I think it was all fine. Like I'll give them probably collectively a solid 1 again.
I don't know. I'm going to pass this off because I'm not decided yet.
Fair enough.
It's really funny because I don't know if this goes back to theme, but you brought up something really cool. The picture of the original crew that he pulls out. I was thinking about this when Beth and I were talking to a Star Trek fan club afterwards. And it's really funny the perspectives you take on the 2 Abrams films. I mean, people love 2009 and hate Into Darkness or vice versa, or they hate both of them, or they love both of them. But so far, what I've seen, the majority of Star Trek fans basically have come together on this one because it achieves the right balance. So, funny enough, we were talking about Kirk, I definitely see Kirk as the main protagonist because I definitely see, if we're going to pull like a main thing as unity, but like the meta narrative, as you guys are talking about, I'm like, is part of the meta narrative to bring all the fans together.
Maybe.
Everybody who said that Star Trek's sacrosanct and don't mess with it, and the people who say, "Oh, get over it," the Abrams film.
You got to go beyond your petty differences.
Yeah, you have to. That may be it. So, I mean, in terms of meta narrative, that was just a sidebar that I just said.
Right.
But I do consider. I agree with you that I believe the whole bridge crew is collectively a protagonist, but I think really it was Kirk's journey, and that he personally felt lost and disconnected from the crew at the beginning, and the crew reassembled before his eyes, and he, basically said, we're together.
Thus giving him the strength to go on. Yes, I get it.
And then at the end, he decided to stay where he was. So yeah, I'm gonna say if definitely Kirk's the protagonist, the main protagonist rather. And I'm definitely giving it a solid one.
Here's the thing is, I feel that most of the character development in here was already considered in Into Dark. I loved Into Darkness, by the way. There was a Tom Clancy thriller in space. And
it's the Star Trek version of Winter Soldier.
Yes, in a way. But they hit a lot of great character beats in that film. Mm-hmm. You had Spock attempting to rationalize the Vulcan being destroyed in his place of being half human, half Vulcan. You had Kirk being like maturing, and again, I just feel like, you've already hit all these points before, and Kirk matured again. He matured I don't know. I wish there was some greater, in a sense, character conflict in here.
I kind of see the first two films as spikes, and I see this more as the evening out. I mean, it's really hard once you get to the third part of any trilogy to say something new about the characters without something monumental happening. And here's Kirk's achieving of his goal. He's and all of a sudden he's 3 years in space. He opens his closet and he sees all the exact same uniforms. And he's trying to look on the bright side of it. So the way I see it is just like it comes to the whole, okay, you're here, now what?
Yeah. See, here's the problem. You said end of a trilogy, but this is not the end of a trilogy.
No, it's not end of a trilogy.
Because at the end of the trilogy would have the resolve of every single character plot up until that point.
But
this is
again,
the continuation.
We know they're going to make more films.
Yeah.
But let me say this is the end of the trilogy in terms of, I believe the character arcs that were started in 2009 have been completely paid off now. I think.
Sure, fine.
I think the next film, whatever it is, they don't have to focus on this level of character development. But I feel like, it was a struggle uphill, and here we are. It arrives, and I feel like it's the whole we survived the apocalypse. Now what? It's just like, okay, we're on the
now what?
Exactly.
Go on.
Now we're on the most sophisticated ship in the Federation. We're the top crew, and we're 3 years in space. It's mundane, and I think if you're going to look at a meta narrative again, Star Trek's a 50 years franchise, and it's just like, what other stories are there to tell? And here you have out of this new trilogy thus far, this new series thus far, this has an original story.
No. Apparently, just rip off Heart of Darkness and you're good to go. So
you use the Kurtz. You use the Kurtz archetype.
I'm just busting your balls, but I see what you mean. So, anyways, I think you got anything else to say about protagonists? Beth?
No.
Anyone else?
I'm going to give it a soft 0.
I'm going to give it a soft 1 for essentially the same reasons. You're giving a soft 0.
This is like Apocalypse, except you and Ian instead of me and Ian balancing each other out, you and Ian are balancing each other out.
I'm Sulu.
What do you got?
I'm definitely giving a 1. Yeah.
Beth?
1.
And we move on to supporting cast with Beth.
I'm going to focus on the alien Jayla and the Commodore Paris, played by Shora Agdashlu, just because I love her, and when she talks, I just want her to keep talking for the rest of my life. She didn't do much in this film, but that doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I love it. And Jayla I liked because I liked her backstory was interesting enough, but I feel like they didn't push it too hard or make it too much of a big deal. It was kind of introduced. You met this girl who was sort of, is she a refugee? Is she just someone it turns out she escaped from Krall's camp, but lost her family and she basically lost everyone she loved, and she's been living on her own in a Federation spaceship that she's found and sort of started putting back together, but she can't make it fly until the Enterprise crew comes along and can help. I found her interesting emotionally because she was brave and yet also terrified at the same time. They had to convince her to help them, and then they did, of course. So she helped, and I found her to be a likable and strong character. So on her strength, and because of Shora Agdashlu, I will give this a 1.
Yeah, I largely agree. I was waiting for you to say she sort of resembled a Mass Effect character as well to me. So maybe that's another layer you can put onto it. But
the whole movie made me think of Mass Effect, but that's just me. So
fair enough. But no, like I liked her. Like you said, like they didn't exposition dump you. You got her backstory though. You understood her motivations and why she was there.
And they showed you that she was technically savvy. Like she could build things, but they didn't explain that to you in words. They weren't like, hey, this girl can build things. Yeah. They just showed you things she built.
Yeah, it was well done characterization. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was good characterization, and she was a good little like side character to join them and help them basically plan out the little their breakout of the captured crew and so forth. So like if we count the actual Enterprise crew as not secondary, then there's not very much other characters left. But they were like on the strength of her as well. We'll give it a 1. I don't have much affinity for the Commodore, but she was perfectly fine too.
No, the Alien J-Lo.
You have to watch The Expanse to really get to know her too.
Fair enough.
Was fantastic, but I want to give a shout out to my favorite character introduced in Star Trek. Scotty is short, like
his engineering.
Keenzer.
Whatever, the Ewok guy. Done right. He's fantastic. Or whatever it is.
That crew member.
They for not having any dialogue whatsoever, they constantly keep it fresh.
Yeah.
Like this one when he vomited on the thing in order to cause an electrical whatever. It works. It is the highlight to me of these movies every time he's on there. So
okay, first Paris. I agree with Beth. Shura Agdashlu can talk forever about anything, but and I'll listen to her. But I think she reflects Kirk's point of view at the beginning and at the end. She reinforces that space is lonely. And at the end, she's like, you got your promotion. And he's like, well, Vice Admirals don't get to fly. And she's like, no. It's like she's both a mirror and a support for him. She validates whatever argument she is. So I actually figured as a minor supporting character, she helps bookend things. I do have to give a shout out to the ensign who hid the MacGuffin and ended up being the test subject of Krall's biological weapon. I thought that was really cool. They developed her just enough that I actually cared about her, and I was sad when she died.
But she got redshirted, essentially.
But, and that was my next point, that she actually wore a blue shirt,
yes,
which I thought was cool.
I guess, sure.
But I was going to bring up 2 supporting characters. The Enterprise first, as much as with the Kirk's point of view when he escapes watching the saucer section go down, I feel in the way Scotty's like, you killed my ship. It wasn't you destroyed it. it was very personal to all of them. So when the woman that baited them into the trap. When they start the thrusters, which I thought was cool because as a manual override or something, you want something to work if the rest of the ship's powered down. I like the fact that in her final last breath, she killed the woman that helped kill her. So I thought that was really sharp. And I'm going to say that right after we saw this movie Thursday night, we got the soundtrack. As soon as it turned midnight, I went on digitally downloaded it because that was when it was released. So I lived with the soundtrack we listened to it pretty much nonstop until we saw it again this morning. And there's the main theme of the new theme of the Star Trek theme, the da 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 da. And I noticed that throughout the film, as the crew members were building and coming together more, they'd always tease it. They'd have the build up, the dun 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 dun.
Sure.
But they never once completed the theme until they got to the starbase and stopped Krall's ships until it came out of the ocean. So while I agree with you, I love Jayla. and I loved, the physical supporting characters. I thought a lot went into supporting this movie, and a lot went into supporting these characters, even if they weren't
Fair enough.
physical
I'll
representations.
give you the Enterprise. That's pretty good. So yeah, I think we're all giving it a 1 collectively for whatever corporeal and or physical and non-material things.
May I
Maybe.
have a quick cut in for a moment?
So wait,
Sure.
so hold on. Before you cut in, let me get. Do we count then? Can I count Kirk's motorcycle as supporting character as well for doing? all
If
this
you
stuff?
want.
All right,
Sure.
go ahead.
I was kind of hoping that this was the end of the original cast, and this would bring in, at the very end, I was hoping they'd bring in Jean-Luc Picard, but played by, who's the guy who took over as Professor X?
James
McAvoy?
McAvoy.
Yeah, James McAvoy comes in as the young. I was hoping that would be how the movie ended.
Sorry, it didn't end that way, but that
I
would
know,
have been funny.
that's very disappointing, but
Well, anyway,
Okay, and dialogue is to me, and it's been very difficult for me to separate the things that I feel like they got right with the characters, the things that were not winks at the audience, but callbacks is insofar as they related to the characters that, these characters had grown into what the old characters were, as well as take on the aspects of the new characters. And to be honest with you, dialogue on its own, I really liked that. Even that you could go from they were in dialogue as much as they were in characters. It was a matter of contrast where you have Kirk and you have Chekhov who watched the Enterprise. They had to go back on and they found out the traitor. And then you have Scotty with this woman, Jayla, and, some humor's there. And then Spock and McCoy, reaching their development as characters, and there's a little humor there. And then there's an absence of humor when we get to Uhura and Sulu. And I don't feel like when I found out that Justin Lin was directing this, I was like, oh my God. And there wasn't trailer fodder. I mean, there was really good dialogue in it. It hit all the points it needed to. I felt it carried the emotional weight. I thought the actors delivered it well. I'm giving it a 1.
it was okay. All right, so I've been using this as a analogy for many things. It was a fine Pilsner. It was just fine. It wasn't amazing, but it wasn't terrible. It was perfectly serviceable, which is another term I use a lot. So, but there's nothing eye-rolling about that I could think of or anything. What? There really? All right, well. But there's nothing I'm not going to quote some awesome badass line either. It was Star Trek dialogue. That's the best credit I can give it. And so it worked for what it is, but it didn't reach any heights, I guess.
If
So
Scotty called, Jayla Lassie one more time,
All right.
I was going to find Simon Pegg and punch him in the face.
All right, I guess.
But there were a number of you mentioned trailer fodder. There were scenes that dialogue seemed out of place because they wanted that dialogue in the trailer, and then it didn't.
See, I didn't
fit.
notice much of that.
Yeah.
I didn't either.
I don't know. It worked for the most part, but I don't. As you said, I don't remember anything good. But I do remember a couple bad parts.
All right, I don't know.
So, I don't
I'm
know.
probably gonna give it a soft 1, but there's nothing too
Again,
egregious,
I'm
like I
going to
said.
balance you out there and
All
give
right,
yourself 0.
fair enough.
Beth.
I'll also give it a 1. None of it sticks out as being particularly brilliant, but I always love everything Spock and McCoy do together. Ever since the original series,
Fair enough.
and they seem to have continued that on their relationship, which is sort of antagonistic, but also love. I'm going to go ahead and say
Friendly rivalry,
yeah.
I guess I'll say.
I know, as you said, a fine Pilsner. I say this. It was too hoppy. It was
All right.
again. I mentioned earlier.
We'll stick with this analogy then.
Spock was at times too Spocky. McCoy was at times too McCoy.
All right.
Kirk at times was
Except
too
that Spock was actually less Spock than he's ever been.
Yes, but I'm establishing this off of the previous few movies. This was more Star Trekky than I prefer, in a way.
I'm sorry, there's too much Star Trek in the fucking Star Trek movie.
Or traditional.
But I see what you mean.
I
So,
love the word Spocky and Spock. I mean, the way you two use Spocky and Spock, that cracked me up.
Sure. Well, I think that's dialogue covered at least, though. We'll have to agree to disagree once again. Spock.
Scott, would you like to talk about the style?
Sure. So like you said, I actually, I was saying just pre-podcast that I thought JJ had directed this one, but he in fact did not. It was, what was his name again?
Justin Lin.
Justin Lin. So, yeah, I mean, like, action Star Trek blockbuster movie. It was fine. Like Beth was saying, the gravity thing on Yorktown was cool. The space scenes, the nebula was very well done. And I actually didn't notice the soundtrack all that much, Chris. I mean, it was there, I guess. But I didn't notice that little thing that you said. So I suppose that's fine. But no, I mean, I think he did a competent job. Like, again, a fine, put-together movie.
I will agree with you. Visually, it was fantastic. I
like the look of the planet as well.
I like the look of the planet. I like the Yorktown and the design of that very much so. The pseudo Dyson sphere, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Wannabe Dyson sphere.
Yeah.
Go on.
But I also like the kind of... It felt very much tied to how old school naval work used to be in a way. Like the term like Yorktown kind of gives that image of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's very much had a very... Again, that's what I like sci-fi and space travel the most, when they are influenced by, in a sense, the real historical aspects of... and again, and the design of the enemies was very neat as well, with the swarm and competing styles of space battle. So that was very neat to me.
Yeah, it was all very solid, and it looked great overall. Mm-hmm. So.
I loved the visual style of the movie. It hit all my Mass Effect buttons, which I don't want to talk about Mass Effect too much because I always do. So I'll just say that.
Because of that. So
I loved it. And the battle, both the first time the Enterprise is attacked and then when the Franklin is now battling, I love, I guess, the choreography of the space battle in combination with the music, because it's beautiful and it's horrific. Like, there's bodies flying, especially in the first battle when the Enterprise is destroyed. There's bodies flying out, dying horribly in fear and terror and alone and in pain, and because they've been introduced to hard vacuum. And yet the music is gorgeous, the visuals are gorgeous, and you don't get like the dissonant music until they're hand-to-hand combat inside the ship. And so I loved all the choreography of that.
Also a good point. Yeah, I was going to say, all the fight scenes was all well done, I'd say.
They had a scene in here which made me regret not seeing it in 3D. Well, I think, Beth, you brought it up earlier, when they have to basically jumpstart the
free
Franklin.
Fall, the Franklin, if you will.
But I actually thought that was visually a really neat scene to watch, where you're through the front windshield of the Franklin as you're plummeting down.
And everybody had seatbelts.
Yeah.
Yes, which is
old school ship.
Which is something
they have seatbelts on the new ship too.
I thought it was because it was an older generation.
No,
ship,
that's the in Star Trek joke that they've always been throwing around. Being knocked off their chairs for years.
That was a fan joke then. Yeah.
Everybody for years has been saying, "Why the hell don't these things have seatbelts?" And Abrams put seatbelts on the Enterprise, and All
right, so it was a take that against those people. Complaints, fine. No, but no, you're right. It was a cool scene. It probably would have been really cool to see in 3D, but it was even cool looking without. So, and everything else also perfectly fine.
Yeah, The Martian ruined any possibility for me to see 3D again.
Okay.
When I heard that Justin Lin was directing this, I was nervous. And there was a lot of action scenes. But as you all said, they're well choreographed. I don't feel they were gratuitous. I felt that they cut back to the characters. What I really thought was great, though, and I really tried to pay attention to, was how is Justin Lin going to handle the interpersonal scenes, the smaller scenes? And I actually thought he handled them very, very well. Yeah, so I'm going to give it a 1. Yeah.
The only thing I had a problem with, every time someone would help Spock walk when he was injured, it was always on that same side. So they kept pulling his arm up on the side that was injured, and I was just cringing. I was like, that must hurt so freaking much.
Yeah, he's Vulcan.
Hey,
walk it off.
I just wanted to keep putting them on the other side of him so it would hurt him less, but that's my only complaint.
That wouldn't have been logical. But
anyway.
I'm a doctor, not a crutch.
Yeah.
Ian, so would you recommend this movie?
I would. I had fun. I gave it. I was harsh and nitpicky at times during this review.
I'm complaining about that.
It's almost as if you're a Star Trek fan.
Yeah.
Go on.
But overall, it was a lot of fun. I still prefer Into Darkness better, but I thought that this is worth a watch. I don't know if I would ever see this movie again necessarily, but take a look.
I mostly agree. Like, I don't want to say it's forgettable. It was you're right. Basically, the best I could say, it was a fun movie to watch and competently put together, an enjoyable Star Wars flick, Star Trek, that is. So, and beyond that, there's nothing, I can't complain about it. I would say, yeah, it's worth going and seeing in theaters. I know, Chris and Beth, you guys have seen it multiple times in theaters. I probably would never going to do that, but you're just a bigger fan of the franchise in general. But yeah, I would say it's a good summer action flick, with using a franchise that's been well established, and if you're into it somewhat, then I think they did a good job.
Beth?
Oh, I heartily recommend this movie.
All right, we just saw it for our second time today. I actually have a buddy who called me up last night and asked me if I wanted to go see it Tuesday, and I am. So that should...
And wait, why did you have to see it twice with me before you could see it a third time?
Because you would have killed me.
Exactly.
Okay. But that was such a hardship. But yeah, I'd recommend it. And to Ian's point when we were talking about other films about like how many ages would it appeal to, literally, Beth and I in the theater on our right side had children who laughed. Were actually quite really well behaved, but who laughed at all the times, genuinely laughed, got a lot of it. And on our left hand side, there is a gentleman who is at least older than I am. And
there were people even older than that.
There were people even older than that. But what I'm saying is we were in a theater with all so I do think this does have a bit of mass appeal.
Sure. And I could see that and agree with it. So yeah, I would give it, again, a solid 1 on recommendation.
Scott and I saw it this morning.
Early afternoonish.
Yes. And we generally see most of the summer blockbusters at that period. I think this was one of the more filled theaters.
It definitely, so far this summer, was more crowded than the other ones, yes.
So, we're ready for scores?
Yep.
Okay. So, Chris and Beth both gave it a perfect 10. Scott gave it a 9. And I gave it a 6. Meaning that our aggregate score is an 8.75.
Which I think is exactly 8.7 is what it has on IMDb or something like that, or Metacritic maybe. So once again, we're right about it. But no, like we just said, it was perfectly fine and well done.
Yeah,
solid.
Yeah. It's an above average movie.
But now they should definitely have, now based on our conversation, they have to change the subtitle to, they have to switch out Into Darkness for this film and call that one something else.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true.
So anyway, that's my final thought on it.
And I believe that wraps up this edition of Bon Mots, the Star Trek 50th anniversary. Kicks off the summer with Star Trek Beyond. I will say I was here with Scott Thurlow.
The horror. Up space. Good night.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Good night.
And Beth Morgan.
Good night.
I'm Chris Morgan. Thank you for joining us.
This has been Bon Mots. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Music and editing by Chris Morgan. This has been a Los Angeles production. All rights reserved.